In the quiet, blue-shadowed alleys behind the old Sinclair gas station in Bozeman, Montana, Ivy Ross pressed her small body up against the side of a battered dumpster, heart pounding in her chest. It was the end of October, and the air bit at her cheeks, making her eyes water. But she didn't care about the cold. She was focused on the low, desperate whine coming from the shadows at her feet. Just beyond the glow of the flickering streetlight, 3 boys from the middle school, Nate Dorsey, Tyler Finch, and Jasper Helm, stood in a rough half circle. They looked older in the night, their faces stretched tight with meanness. Between them and Ivy, a German shepherd lay on the damp concrete, ribs heaving, one paw curled protectively under his chest. Ivy had never seen a dog quite like this one before. His fur was matted with blood and filth, but there was a strange, quiet dignity to him, as if he refused to flinch even in the face of pain. Nate took a step closer, swinging a broken broom handle like a baseball bat. "Let's see if he can fetch," he sneered, jabbing the stick toward the dog's side. The shepherd didn't move, didn't even snarl. He just fixed his deep amber eyes on Ivy, silent as the moon. Ivy's hands curled into fists. Without thinking, she pushed between the boys and the dog. "Stop it!" she shouted, voice trembling but loud enough to echo down the alley. "Leave him alone," Tyler scoffed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. "What's it to you, Ross?" "It's just a stray. Probably has rabies." Ivy shook her head, refusing to step aside. She met each boy's gaze in turn, drawing herself up to her full height. Not that it was much, but in that moment she felt taller than all of them. "He's hurt. You don't get to make it worse." Jasper started to laugh, but then the shepherd let out a low, guttural growl. It wasn't loud, but it made something in the back of Ivy's mind go cold. The boys hesitated. A pair of headlights swept across the alley, and Ivy's aunt's car rolled to a stop. The door slammed, and Maddie Ross appeared, tall and wild-haired in her nurse's scrubs, eyes wide as she took in the scene. "What the hell is going on here?" she demanded, voice sharper than Ivy had ever heard. The boys scattered instantly, slipping away into the darkness with the practiced speed of kids who'd been caught before. Maddie rushed to Ivy, crouching beside her. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Ivy shook her head, pointing urgently at the shepherd. "He needs help. Please, Aunt Maddie. He's bleeding." Maddie's gaze fell on the dog, and her expression softened, just a little. "Oh, sweetie, Ivy, we can't just—" She stopped herself as she saw the shepherd's wounds, the way his side rose and fell with shallow, labored breaths. Maddie reached out a cautious hand, speaking in the soothing voice she used with anxious patience. "Hey there, buddy. It's okay. We're not going to hurt you." The dog didn't move. His eyes never left Ivy's face. Something electric passed between girl and dog. A strange stillness, almost as if time itself had slowed. Ivy's fear melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of calm. She knelt beside the shepherd, one hand hovering just above his fur. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now, Asher." Maddie blinked. "Asher? How do you know his name?" Ivy's brow furrowed. "He told me," she said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The moment hung in the air, thick with something neither Ivy nor Maddie could name. The shepherd's tail gave the barest flick, a silent thank you, or maybe a plea. Maddie glanced up and down the alley, her nurse's training battling with her sense of responsibility. She didn't have time for this. There was dinner to make, laundry to fold, lesson plans to check, but Ivy's face was streaked with dirt and determination, and the dog's wounds were real. With a sigh, she took off her scarf and gently draped it over the shepherd's back, pressing lightly against the bleeding side. "Help me get him into the car, Ivy. But this is just until we find his owner, okay?" Ivy nodded, scrambling to help. Together, they coaxed the wounded dog to his feet. He leaned heavily on Ivy, and she marveled at his weight, the heat of his body, the trust in his eyes. Every step was an effort, but Asher did not whimper or resist. They bundled him into the back seat. Ivy climbed in beside him, stroking his matted fur as Maddie sped toward the nearest animal clinic. The drive passed in a blur, flashing lights, the hum of tires on cracked asphalt, Maddie's voice tight with worry as she called ahead to the vet. At the clinic, Ivy refused to leave Asher's side. When the vet tried to separate them, Ivy's eyes filled with tears, her grip on the dog unbreakable. "Please don't take him away," she begged. "He's scared. He needs me." The vet, a kind woman named Dr. Nguyen, relented, letting Ivy stay through the examination. She explained that Asher had old scars, some surgical. "This isn't just a street dog," Dr. Nguyen murmured to Maddie. "He's been through something, and someone went to a lot of trouble to keep him alive." Later, as the clinic grew quiet and the world outside settled into darkness, Ivy curled up on the waiting room bench, her hand resting on Asher's side. She felt the steady thump of his heartbeat, and something in her own chest relaxed for the first time in months. Maddie watched her niece, torn between worry and awe. The dog's eerie stillness and Ivy's unshakable calm had unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. Was it luck that Ivy had found the shepherd, or something stranger? As she drove them home, with Asher wrapped in blankets, Ivy's head resting against his side, Maddie couldn't shake the feeling that the night had shifted something in all their lives. And in the hush between the girl and the wounded dog, Maddie heard it again, Ivy's quiet voice, full of conviction. "Don't worry, Asher. I'll protect you now." And from the way the shepherd's eyes glowed in the darkness, Maddie almost believed he understood every word. The animal clinic's overhead lights buzzed, casting long, sharp-edged shadows along the walls. Ivy didn't notice any of it. She was perched on a metal folding chair, knees pulled up to her chest, watching every move as Dr. Nguyen and her vet tech gently examined the battered German shepherd on the steel table. Ivy kept whispering, "It's okay, Asher. I'm right here. You're not alone." And every time Asher's breathing hitched, Ivy would reach out and stroke the soft, uninjured spot behind his ear until his heartbeat calmed. Maddie Ross hovered near the reception desk, filling out forms with a borrowed pen. Her hands trembled, not just from the chill that seemed to radiate off the tile floor, but from something less familiar, fear. For months, she'd worried about Ivy's night terrors, her withdrawn silences, her sleeplessness since her parents' accident. Now, for the first time, Ivy seemed anchored, fiercely alive, all her energy pouring into the wounded dog on the table. Dr. Nguyen's voice broke the silence. "He's lucky you found him when you did. These wounds aren't all new. Some look like old surgical scars, maybe from a rough operation or something. Experimental." She looked at Maddie, searching for answers. "Do you know where he came from?" Maddie shook her head. "We found him behind the gas station. Ivy says his name is Asher. She just seems to know." Dr. Nguyen raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. She cleaned and stitched the worst of Asher's injuries, checking his vitals and carefully bandaging his ribs. "He'll need time to heal. No sudden movements, plenty of rest, and medication twice a day for the infection. I'll scan for a microchip, but he's not wearing a collar and his nails are trimmed." Someone cared for him, at least for a while. When Dr. Nguyen finally finished, she nodded at Ivy. "You can talk to him now, sweetheart. But he needs sleep, just like you do." Ivy scooted forward, laying her cheek gently against Asher's massive head. "You're safe here," she murmured, voice raw with promise. Maddie watched, torn between amazement and worry. Ivy hadn't let herself get this close to anything, or anyone, since the accident. But soon came the problem Maddie had been dreading. "We have to take him to the city shelter tonight," Dr. Nguyen said, regret thick in her tone. "There's no room to keep a dog this size at the clinic, and you can't take him home. He needs to be observed for infection and trauma. Bozeman Animal Shelter is a good place. I promise." The words hit Ivy like a punch. "No!" she cried, hugging Asher tighter. "He can't go to the shelter. He's scared of cages. He told me. Please, Aunt Maddie, please don't let them take him." Maddie hesitated. She could see the shelter's van pulling into the parking lot. The last thing she needed was another fight, another sleepless night. But the terror in Ivy's eyes made the decision for her. "Wait," Maddie said, turning to Dr. Nguyen. "Can we take him home for a few days? Just until he's stronger, or we find his owner? I can give him his meds and keep him quiet. I'm a nurse. I know how to handle wounds." Dr. Nguyen glanced from Ivy to Maddie, reading the desperation in their faces. After a long pause, she sighed. "All right. But you'll have to check in every day. And if his fever spikes or he stops eating, bring him back right away." Relief flooded Ivy's face so suddenly that Maddie nearly teared up. Together, they helped Asher off the table. He was weak but determined, and Ivy wouldn't let anyone else steady him. They shuffled to the car, Ivy refusing to let go of his paw until they were safely buckled in the back seat. That night, the world changed inside Maddie's small rented house. She pulled the old sleeping bag from the hall closet, spreading it beside Ivy's bed. "Just for a few days," Maddie repeated, more to herself than anyone else, "until we figure out what's next." Ivy curled up beside Asher, arms wrapped around his neck. Maddie watched from the doorway, half expecting Ivy's usual bedtime routine. Tears, pleas for her parents, nightmares that sent her pacing the halls at 3 a.m. But Ivy only whispered to Asher, soft and steady, until both of them drifted off to sleep. Hours later, Maddie found herself wide awake, tiptoeing to Ivy's room. She stood in the doorway, the moonlight casting silver patterns on the quilt. Ivy was still asleep, breathing slow and deep for the first time in months. Asher, bandaged and tired, watched Maddie with those same deep eyes. He blinked, almost as if he was assuring her he'd stand guard all night. Maddie's shoulders sagged with a complicated mix of exhaustion and hope. She went back to bed, leaving the door open just a crack. In the stillness, she listened to the peaceful rhythm of Ivy's sleep. It was something she hadn't heard since before the accident. Something she'd started to believe was lost forever. The next morning, Ivy bounded into the kitchen, cheeks pink, eyes shining with energy Maddie hadn't seen in ages. "Can we give him a bath today?" she asked, glancing toward the bathroom where Asher waited patiently, still and calm. "Maybe after breakfast," Maddie said, pouring oatmeal into bowls, "and then we'll call around, see if anyone's missing a German Shepherd named Asher." Asher ate quietly, never begging, but never more than a foot away from Ivy. When Ivy wandered to the living room to draw, Asher followed, collapsing at her feet. If Ivy moved to the window to watch the falling leaves, Asher shuffled after her, gaze never leaving her face. Maddie made calls to the shelter, posted photos in the neighborhood Facebook group, and texted friends around town. Nobody claimed to know the dog or where he'd come from. At the same time, Maddie's mind spun with questions she couldn't shake. Who had trained this dog to be so gentle, so attuned to Ivy? And why did Ivy seem to understand him so well, as if she was hearing things the rest of the world missed? Days passed in a strange, golden calm. Ivy started sleeping through the night, her nightmares fading, her laughter filling the house again. She insisted on helping with Asher's medicine, learned to change his bandages with careful hands, and read to him from her favorite book about rescue dogs. Asher listened, never interrupting, eyes warm and intent. Maddie watched the transformation in Ivy, her heart swelling with relief. Still, a seed of unease grew with every passing day. She caught Ivy whispering secrets to Asher, telling him things she'd never shared with anyone. Sometimes Ivy would pause, cock her head as if listening to something only she could hear, then smile. A deep, secret smile that made Maddie's skin prickle. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Ivy sat with Asher in the backyard. The sky was streaked with gold and lavender, and the world felt impossibly quiet. Ivy looked up at Maddie, her hand resting on Asher's broad back. "He's not scared anymore," Ivy said, her voice wise beyond her years. "He knows we won't let anything bad happen to him." Maddie managed a small smile, though worry still nagged at her. "We'll keep him safe, Ivy, for as long as we can." But as Ivy and Asher sat together in the last light of day, Maddie felt a chill run down her spine. Something about their bond, their shared silences, the way Ivy seemed to know what the dog needed before he did, felt almost otherworldly. The thought crept in, unbidden. Maybe Asher wasn't the only one who needed protecting. That night, as Ivy slept soundly for the third night in a row, Maddie sat at the kitchen table, staring at the vet's discharge papers. She looked down the hallway at her sleeping niece, her heart aching with both hope and fear. Just for a few days, she reminded herself. But as she listened to Ivy's peaceful breathing and the steady, watchful presence of Asher beside her, Maddie couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to change forever. The days after Asher's arrival at the Ross house blurred together in a haze of autumn sunshine, warm soup, and whispered secrets. Ivy and Asher became inseparable. Wherever Ivy went, Asher padded silently behind her, his big head brushing her elbow, his eyes always alert, always watching. At first, Maddie found comfort in their bond. Ivy was sleeping through the night, eating again, laughing in the mornings as she brushed Asher's fur. The old shadows that had haunted her niece's eyes seemed to shrink in the presence of the battered shepherd. But as the week wore on, Maddie noticed things that unsettled her. It started with the little things. Ivy spoke to Asher in a sing-song whisper, sometimes using words Maddie had never heard her say. Sometimes she'd be perfectly still for several minutes, as if she were listening to something that no one else could hear. And then Ivy began to mention things. Odd, unsettling things about Asher's past. One afternoon, as leaves rattled across the backyard, Ivy and Asher lounged in the grass, a comic book open between them. Maddie brought out a tray of apple slices and sat on the porch, just close enough to hear their conversation. "I know what happened to you, Asher," Ivy said softly, not looking up from her book. "You were locked in a small red cage. There was a bad man with a scar on his chin, and you missed your friend, the little dog with the blue collar." Maddie's heart jumped. She set down the tray with trembling hands, trying not to betray her sudden nerves. Where was Ivy getting these ideas? Maddie glanced at Asher. He was perfectly still, eyes locked on Ivy, as if drinking in every word. After a moment, Maddie called out, "Ivy, how do you know about the red cage? Did you see it in a dream?" Ivy shook her head. "No, he showed me. Sometimes I just see things. Asher remembers, and I remember too." Maddie forced a smile, masking her unease. "That's quite an imagination, kiddo." But that night, after Ivy went to bed, Maddie couldn't shake the image. The next morning, over breakfast, Ivy scribbled on the back of a grocery list a shaky drawing of a tall man with a thin scar on his chin standing in front of a metal cage with bars painted red. "That's him?" she said with certainty, sliding the drawing across the table. Maddie tried to hide her alarm. "Where did you see this man, Ivy? Did someone at school?" Ivy shook her head, her spoon hovering over her oatmeal. "He's real. He hurt Asher and other dogs too. He put them in cages. He's looking for Asher. You have to keep him safe." The words chilled Maddie, but she tried to sound reassuring. "It's just a story, honey. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us, especially when we care about someone." But Ivy only gazed at her aunt with a calm, almost eerie conviction. "It's not a story. I can feel it. He's not far." After dropping Ivy at school, Maddie couldn't get the drawing out of her head. On a whim, she searched for recent news about animal cruelty in Montana. Her screen filled with headlines: missing dogs, suspected trafficking, mysterious surgical scars on animals found abandoned in rural areas. One article included a blurry photo of a man being led away in handcuffs, his chin marred by a thin white scar. Maddie's blood ran cold. Her hands shaking, she clicked through the links, each article painting a picture more disturbing than the last. The stories matched Ivy's descriptions: cages painted red, dogs with surgical scars, strange disappearances. But how could Ivy know any of this? Maddie thought of the way Ivy sometimes woke in the night, gasping for air, whispering Asher's name. She thought of the way Asher never left Ivy's side, as if he trusted her completely. That afternoon, Maddie picked Ivy up from school early. As they drove home, she watched her niece in the rearview mirror. "Ivy, about the man you drew. Are you sure you didn't see him on TV? Or maybe someone at school told you about him?" Ivy shook her head, petting Asher's head through the open window. He was in Asher's mind. "Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see what he saw. The red cage, the man with the scar, the way it smelled like bleach and metal. He's scared of that man, Maddie. We both are. The car was silent for a moment. Maddie's pulse hammered in her ears. She wanted to believe it was all just a child's fantasy, a way of processing trauma. But the details were too specific, too real. Later that night, after Ivy fell asleep, Maddie dug deeper into the news reports. She found a forum for local animal rescue volunteers, sharing rumors about a man named Greg Evers, GE, suspected of running an illegal operation smuggling and experimenting on dogs in remote Montana shelters. Evers had been arrested months ago, but released on bail. The reports mentioned a distinctive scar on his chin. Maddie's hands shook as she printed the most relevant articles. It was more than a coincidence. It felt like a warning. She tiptoed into Ivy's room and found her niece curled up with Asher, both sound asleep. The dog's ears twitched as Maddie entered, and for a split second, she felt as if Asher could see straight through her, understanding more than any dog should. The next day, Maddie brought the articles to Dr. Nguyen at the clinic. "Is it possible," she asked quietly, "that Asher could have come from somewhere like this?" She pointed to the reports of animal experiments and missing dogs. Dr. Nguyen frowned, her lips pursed. "Anything's possible. I've seen stranger things, but the kind of bond Ivy has with him, it's rare. I've read studies about animal-child empathy, but nothing like this." As Maddie left the clinic, she felt a sense of dread settling in her chest. She needed answers, but all she had were questions. Back home, Ivy was sitting in the backyard with Asher, her hands buried in his fur. As Maddie watched them through the window, she felt the air in the room turn heavy. Was it possible that something more than love connected her niece to this dog? Something engineered, or even supernatural? That night, a thunderstorm swept through Bozeman, shaking the windows and rattling the roof. Ivy clung to Asher, her face pressed into his side, whispering, "It's okay. You're not alone." Asher didn't flinch at the thunder. He simply gazed at Ivy with absolute trust. Maddie sat awake at the kitchen table, the storm rumbling overhead, staring at the clippings and Ivy's drawings spread before her. She felt as if the world had tilted on its axis. Everything she thought she knew about her niece, about animals, about the limits of connection, was suddenly up for grabs. She knew one thing for certain. Someone had done terrible things to Asher, and Ivy was the only person who could truly reach him. But as Maddie gazed at the sleeping pair, she wondered if their bond was a gift, or a warning of something darker still to come. It started with a chill that had nothing to do with the changing Montana weather. By the third week after Asher entered their lives, Maddie found herself double-checking locks, glancing over her shoulder when she took out the trash, and waking in the middle of the night at the slightest creak of the old floorboards. Something had shifted, a quiet unease settling over the house. It was Saturday morning when Maddie noticed the black SUV. She was making breakfast, pouring pancake batter into the skillet, when she spotted the car idling at the far end of the block. Its windows were tinted, the engine running just long enough to fog the air before it glided silently away. At first, she dismissed it. Their neighborhood was quiet, but not immune to lost delivery drivers or curious tourists. But when she saw the same SUV parked across the street 2 afternoons later, her stomach dropped. She tried not to let Ivy see her worry. Ivy had grown more confident, spending her afternoons drawing or reading with Asher, their laughter drifting through the open window. But even Ivy seemed more watchful, glancing up from her sketches at the smallest sound outside. It was on a Wednesday evening, the sun dipping behind the mountains and throwing long golden shadows across their backyard, when Ivy brought Maddie a new drawing. "He's close now," Ivy said, pushing the crumpled paper into Maddie's hands. The picture showed the black SUV, drawn with careful detail, its license plate half hidden in shadows. The driver's face a dark blur. Ivy's small handwriting beneath read, "He's watching." Maddie knelt down, searching Ivy's eyes. "Did you see this car? Or did you dream it?" Ivy shook her head. "He's here. He wants Asher back." A cold shiver worked its way up Maddie's spine. She tried to brush off Ivy's words, but the tension in her chest wouldn't ease. That night, She checked the doors 3 times before crawling into bed, heart hammering against her ribs. The next day, Maddie came home from work to find Ivy and Asher waiting on the porch. Ivy was quiet, clutching Asher's collar with white-knuckled fingers. "What's wrong, honey?" Maddie asked, dropping her bag by the door. Ivy pointed to the backyard. "There's something stuck in the fence. I heard Asher growling." "I think someone was out there." Alarm bells rang in Maddie's head. She strode across the backyard, heart pounding. Sure enough, embedded in the wooden slats of the fence, was a small metallic dart, the kind she'd seen in movies, tipped with tranquilizer. Maddie's breath caught in her throat. She plucked it free, turning it over in her palm. The base was stamped with tiny letters, indecipherable but official-looking. Not the kind of thing you found at a sporting goods store. She hustled Ivy and Asher inside, triple locking the doors and pulling the curtains tight. Asher paced the living room, never straying far from Ivy's side. He paused by the window, hackles raised, growling low in his throat. For the first time, Maddie realized how much she'd come to rely on the shepherd's quiet strength. But tonight, even Asher seemed uneasy. Ears perked, muscles tensed, eyes darting to every shadow. Maddie tried to hide her own panic, putting on a brave face for Ivy's sake. But the dread was hard to mask. That evening, she called the non-emergency police line, explaining about the dart and the suspicious SUV. The dispatcher promised to send a patrol car through the neighborhood, but Maddie heard the skepticism in their voice. Stray darts? A strange car? Not exactly a top priority. After Ivy went to bed, Maddie sat at the kitchen table, staring at the dart on the counter. She called Dr. Nguyen, describing what she'd found. Dr. Nguyen listened in silence, then spoke in a low voice. "That's not a regular tranquilizer dart, Maddie. Labs sometimes use those for large animals. Medical research, sometimes illegal. Be careful. If someone's looking for Asher, they might be desperate." Maddie's hands trembled as she hung up the phone. She made her decision. No more pretending this was just a child's fantasy or a run of bad luck. Something dangerous was circling their lives, and she needed to be ready. She sat in Ivy's room for a long time that night, watching her niece sleep with Asher curled protectively at her side. Ivy mumbled in her dreams, her hand tangled in Asher's thick fur. Occasionally, Asher's ears twitched, as if he too was haunted by nightmares only he and Ivy could see. Sometime after midnight, Maddie heard a car rumble down the street, headlights flashing across the ceiling. She held her breath, her whole body tensed for the sound of tires stopping, a door opening, footsteps on the gravel. But the car moved on, swallowed by the night. The next morning, Ivy woke up unusually quiet, her eyes heavy with worry. "He was outside last night," Ivy whispered, clutching her pillow. "He's getting closer, Maddie. He knows where we are." Maddie tried to reassure her, but Ivy's certainty was unshakable. After breakfast, Maddie packed a bag with essentials: cash, snacks, Ivy's favorite book, Asher's medication, and the most important documents she could grab. She didn't want to scare Ivy, but something told her they might need to leave in a hurry. As the day wore on, the house felt smaller, more suffocating. Maddie jumped at every knock on the door, every ring of the phone. She tried to act normal, tidying up, washing dishes, calling the school to let them know Ivy would be out sick. But underneath it all, she was calculating escape routes, thinking about back roads out of Bozeman, replaying the image of that dart in her mind. Late that afternoon, Maddie called her childhood friend, Cam Ortega, now a sheriff's deputy in a nearby county. She explained everything: the SUV, the dart, Ivy's drawings, and the growing fear in her gut. Cam listened carefully, promising to keep an eye out and call if he heard anything strange from neighboring departments. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of bruised plums, Maddie sat with Ivy and Asher on the porch, arms around both of them. She tried to soak up the peace of the moment: the chirp of crickets, the smell of damp leaves, the weight of Ivy's head on her shoulder. But inside, dread pooled in her chest. She realized this wasn't just about protecting Ivy from nightmares anymore. Something real was closing in on them. Something with a scar and a red cage, and a reason to never let Asher go. And as darkness crept over Bozeman, Maddie made a silent vow. Whatever it took, She would keep Ivy and Asher safe, even if it meant running, even if it meant leaving everything she knew behind. The world outside was no longer safe. The line between imagination and reality had shattered, and in its place was a single, burning truth. Someone was hunting them, and time was running out. The night air was thick with tension as Maddie moved quietly through the house, her hands trembling as she zipped up a duffel bag. Every sound seemed amplified. The tick of the old wall clock, the distant bark of a dog, the gentle rush of wind against the windows. In the background, Ivy sat on the floor next to Asher, her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. Neither girl nor dog made a sound. They didn't need to. There was an understanding between them, as if they shared the same heartbeat, a silent signal that something had shifted, that safety was no longer something to take for granted. Maddie paused for a moment, scanning the small living room, taking in the family photos, the crocheted blanket on the couch, the stack of Ivy's books. It all felt fragile now, as if the past few weeks of peace were just a mirage. She gently squeezed Ivy's shoulder. "We have to go," she whispered, voice thick with urgency and regret. Ivy nodded. She didn't ask why. She didn't cry. She only whispered, "Asher says we should leave tonight. It's not safe anymore." They moved quickly, Maddie carrying the bag and Ivy guiding Asher to the car, careful not to jostle his healing wounds. Maddie double-checked the locks, unplugged the lamps, and left the porch light on, anything to make the house look occupied. She tried not to think about whether they would ever come back. The old sedan coughed to life, headlights cutting a pale path through the darkness. Maddie gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She glanced in the rearview mirror more times than she could count, scanning for the black SUV or any unfamiliar headlights. Every mile felt heavy, thick with dread. They headed south, toward the interstate. Maddie hadn't planned beyond getting away. Her mind buzzed with questions. Where could they go? Who could they trust? Should she call Cam Ortega again, or would that put him in danger too? Ivy sat in the back seat with Asher's big head in her lap, her hands buried in his fur, whispering to him in a language only they seemed to understand. The first night, they stopped at a roadside motel, one of those places with flickering neon, where the walls smelled faintly of mildew, and the manager barely looked up from his television. Maddie paid cash, using a false name. She parked the car close to the room, scanned the parking lot twice, and triple-locked the door. Inside, Ivy curled up with Asher on the faded bedspread, whispering to him until both drifted into uneasy sleep. Maddie sat awake in the hard-backed chair by the window, eyes burning, watching headlights pass in the night. She tried to piece together a plan. They couldn't run forever, but stopping felt impossible. The days on the road blurred together. Early morning departures, gas station coffee, hurried meals in diners where no one asked questions. Maddie called Dr. Nguyen from a payphone, giving her updates and asking if she'd heard anything strange. The answer was always the same. Nothing concrete, but a lingering sense that someone was still looking. Ivy seemed different on the road. She was quieter, more inward, but there was a steadiness to her. She never once complained about the cramped car or the unfamiliar motels. She was laser-focused on Asher, tending to his wounds, reminding Maddie when it was time for his medication, and talking to him every night before bed. One afternoon, as they crossed into Idaho, Ivy had a dream she described in vivid detail when she woke, tears shining in her eyes. "I saw cages," she whispered. Sitting up straight in the motel bed, Asher pressed against her. Rows and rows of metal cages, some painted red, some gray. There were dogs and cats, and a giant glass window with GE stenciled on it. There was a woman in a white coat with cold eyes. She kept saying numbers, like we were all just experiments. Maddie's heart clenched. She scribbled notes, ours on the back of a gas receipt. "Did you see anything else? Anything that could tell us where it was?" Ivy nodded slowly. There were mountains in the distance. And I could hear trains. The dogs cried at night. Some had tags, others didn't. Asher was there, and so was the man with the scar. He's not done looking, Maddie. That name, G.E., echoed in Maddie's mind. After Ivy fell back asleep, Maddie pulled out her phone, searching for any lead. It didn't take long before she found it. Global Evolution Labs, a biotech company that had made headlines 2 years ago, they claimed to be working on new therapies for animal health. But the company was abruptly shut down after allegations of illegal animal testing and trafficking. The news stories mentioned experimental empathy programs and a series of mysterious disappearances, but the trail went cold after a few weeks. She clicked through article after article, her stomach turning with each new revelation. There were rumors of animal-child empathy links, strange reports from former employees, and hints that the company had simply rebranded and moved its operations across state lines. Maddie felt the pieces snapping into place: Asher's surgical scars, Ivy's uncanny connection, the relentless pursuit. The next day, Maddie bought a burner phone and called Cam Ortega again, her voice hushed as she described what she'd found. "It's bigger than we thought, Cam. This isn't just about a missing dog. There's something going on at Global Evolution. Something that links Ivy and Asher. We need help." Cam promised to look into it. "Stay off the grid. Don't trust anyone you don't know. I'll call as soon as I find anything." As the sun set, Maddie and Ivy drove deeper into Idaho, taking winding roads that led away from the highway. They passed small towns and endless fields, the world growing quieter, more remote. Maddie found a secluded cabin listed on a forgotten rental website, a place she hoped no one would think to look. That night, huddled in the drafty cabin, Ivy dreamed again. She woke with a start, breathless, clutching Asher's fur. "He's getting closer," she whispered. "He's angry. He wants Asher back, and he knows we're running." Maddie pulled Ivy and Asher close, her arms shaking as she held them. "We're together," she said fiercely. "No matter what happens, we stay together." Outside, the night was filled with the sound of wind and the distant, lonely howl of a coyote. Inside, Maddie made another vow. She would fight for Ivy, for Asher, for their right to finally be free of fear. But as she watched her niece and the battered shepherd finally drift into uneasy sleep, Maddie knew the real fight was only just beginning. The cabin was more shelter than home, a slant-roofed structure tucked deep in the Idaho woods, where the nearest neighbor was a mile down a potholed dirt road. The air here was sharper, laced with pine and the promise of the first snows. To Maddie, the isolation felt like a relief and a threat all at once. She checked the locks each night and kept her phone on silent, watching the road for any sign they'd been followed. Inside, Ivy and Asher adapted quickly. Ivy spent her days sketching by the wood stove. Asher stretched at her feet, the flicker of the fire softening his scars. Some nights Ivy would read aloud to Asher, animal rescue stories, tales of hope and survival, her voice calm, steady, determined. Maddie sometimes wondered who was helping whom, but a nervous energy hung over everything, a feeling that grew with each passing hour. It was there in the way Maddie jumped at every snap of a twig outside, and in the way Asher slept lightly, his ears pricked for the faintest sound. Even Ivy, who tried to fill their days with routine, seemed more watchful, asking for the lights to be left on at night and checking the windows before bed. The 6th night at the cabin, a storm moved in. Lightning crackled over the ridgeline, thunder rolling through the woods. Maddie pressed her face to the glass, watching wind bend the pines, her mind circling the same questions. How long could they keep running? Who would help them if they called for help now? What if the man with the scar found them first? As midnight approached, Maddie's phone vibrated. A text from Cam Ortega. "Heard about lab vans in the area. Stay sharp. Call if anything weird." Maddie's chest tightened. She set the phone down and quietly checked the doors one last time. Later, Maddie finally let herself drift off in the living room armchair, the sound of Ivy's slow, even breathing mingling with Asher's soft snuffles. But outside, the storm had quieted, and in that stillness, something changed. A soft crunch of gravel, a low click, metallic, deliberate. Asher's head shot up, ears stiff, a growl rising from deep in his chest. Ivy woke instantly, clinging to his fur, her wide eyes searching Maddie's face in the dim firelight. "Someone's outside," she whispered, and Maddie's blood ran cold. The front door shuddered, then crashed open with a splintering crack. 3 masked figures stormed in, men in black jackets, boots pounding the wood floor. One had a tranquilizer gun, another a heavy flashlight, the third held a metal rod. Maddie lunged for Ivy, shoving her behind the couch. Asher leapt to his feet, hackles raised, teeth bared in a snarl that filled the tiny cabin. The man with the tranquilizer dart fired, striking Asher's shoulder. The shepherd yelped, staggering, but lunged at the attacker with desperate strength. Chaos exploded. Maddie screamed for help. Ivy sobbed. Asher fought, snapping at arms and legs as the men tried to drag him away. One of the men swung the metal rod. Asher took the blow, whimpering but refusing to let go. Ivy shrieked, scrambling to Asher's side, throwing herself over his body. The flashlight beam flickered over the chaos, illuminating the terror on Ivy's face, the wild, frantic energy in Maddie's eyes. Adrenaline roared through Maddie. She grabbed a heavy glass lamp and hurled it at the closest attacker, catching him in the side of the head. The man grunted, staggered, and fell, dazed. Maddie scrambled for Ivy, yanking her away from the fray as Asher, eyes glazed but defiant, clamped down on the wrist of the man with the tranquilizer gun. Suddenly, headlights swept through the trees, a second car pulling up the driveway. The attackers froze, one shouting into a radio. Outside, a new voice boomed. "Sheriff's office, drop your weapons, hands where I can see them." The attackers bolted for the back door, dragging their wounded friend. Asher struggled to his feet, swaying, his breathing ragged. Maddie cradled Ivy, who was sobbing, her arms locked around Asher's neck. The dog's eyes fluttered, but he stayed upright, still guarding Ivy with his battered body. A moment later, Cam Ortega burst through the door, gun drawn, his badge glinting in the firelight. "Maddie, Ivy, you okay?" Maddie could barely speak. They tried to take Asher. They had guns, darts." Cam hurried to their side, radioing for backup. He knelt beside Asher, quickly checking the wound. "He's been dosed, but not enough to take him down. That's one tough dog." He handed Maddie his jacket, urging her to wrap Ivy in it. The next hour blurred, sirens in the distance, the crackle of police radios, Cam's calm voice guiding them through shock. Paramedics checked Ivy and Maddie for injuries, but Ivy refused to leave Asher's side even as the dog's breathing slowed. Cam gently coaxed Maddie outside, promising to keep watch as backup swept the woods for the fleeing attackers. Through the chaos, Maddie's mind whirled. Someone had found them, despite every precaution. They weren't safe, not even here. But they weren't alone now. Cam was here, a lifeline in the storm. Inside the cabin, Ivy stroked Asher's head, whispering, "Stay with me. Please, don't leave me." Asher's eyelids drooped, but his tail thumped weakly against the floor, a small promise he was still fighting. By dawn, the storm had passed. Deputies had scoured the woods, finding only footprints and tire tracks leading back toward the highway. Cam briefed Maddie in hushed tones. These men weren't local. They moved like pros. But we have one of their darts, and I'm putting a patrol on every road out of here. We'll get you someplace safer. Maddie clung to Ivy, exhaustion and gratitude mingling in her chest. Ivy had finally stopped crying, her face pale but determined as she sat by Asher, stroking his fur. Asher slept deeply, his breathing slow but steady, the tranquilizer finally fading from his system. Later that morning, Cam loaded their bags into his squad car. "We're going to my place for now," he said. "No one will find you there. And I'll get the dart analyzed. Maybe it'll tell us where these guys are coming from." Maddie nodded, fighting tears. She scooped Ivy into her arms, whispering a promise that they would never be separated. Ivy hugged Asher tightly before Cam helped Maddie lift the big shepherd into the back seat, wrapping him in a blanket. As the sun rose over the Idaho woods, painting everything gold, Maddie looked back at the battered cabin. Shattered door, broken lamp, a smear of blood on the floor, and felt a surge of grim determination. They'd survived, but the fight was far from over. Beside her, Ivy pressed her face into Asher's fur, whispering, "I knew you'd protect me. We're going to save you too. I promise." And as Cam drove them away, Maddie stared at the road ahead, bracing for whatever would come next. The game had changed. The enemy had revealed his hand. And now, more than ever, Maddie understood. They would have to risk everything to finally set Ivy and Asher free. Cam Ortega's farmhouse was nothing like Maddie's neat rental or the cabin's rustic chill. It was all sturdy wood, faded family photos, a muddy porch, and the constant scent of brewed coffee. Maddie was too exhausted to care about anything but the heavy bolt on the door and the way Cam moved through the house, every gesture steady, every word a quiet promise that nobody would get through him. The first night, Ivy curled up with Asher on a pile of blankets in Cam's spare bedroom. She didn't even flinch at the sound of Cam's radio or the deep rumble of thunder outside. Asher pressed close to her, his breathing rough but steady, his golden eyes never leaving the door. Maddie couldn't sleep. She paced the hallway, replaying the attack in her mind. The crack of the door, the masked men, Asher's howl of pain. She knew they'd been lucky. If Cam hadn't arrived when he did, she might have lost both Ivy and Asher in a single violent sweep. The fear was still there, a lead weight in her gut, but now it mixed with something else, anger and a burning need for answers. In the morning, Cam came back from his early shift with a file folder and a small evidence bag. He placed the dart on the kitchen table, pointing out the faded blue serial number stamped at the base. "Idaho Fish and Game never uses this type," he said, "but I made a few calls. It's identical to the darts used by a private biotech lab in Boise, one that spun out of Global Evolution Labs after their scandal." Different name, same faces. Maddie flipped through the folder, news clippings, property records, a blurry photo of a glass-walled building in an industrial park. "They're still operating?" she breathed. Cam nodded. Quietly. Officially, they claim to run a pet therapy research facility, but law enforcement's been shut out. The owners have powerful connections, money, lawyers, the works. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "But there's more. I got the serial number on Asher's microchip. It matches a shipment that was routed through Global Evolution 2 years ago. He was part of an Empathy Link pilot program. The idea was to create super therapeutic animals for kids with trauma, animals who could sync emotionally with children in need." Maddie stared at him, her mind racing. "That explains everything. Why Ivy understands him, why she dreams his memories. It isn't magic, it's science, engineering. They did this to him, to both of them." Cam nodded, grim. "It's dangerous stuff, Maddie. These programs were supposed to be shut down. But if Asher escaped, and if Ivy is syncing with him, just like in those old case files, that would make them both targets." Maddie shivered, thinking of the masked men, the dart, the SUV that kept finding them. "They'll never stop, will they?" "No," Cam said quietly. "Not as long as the people behind the program think they can get away with it. But now we have evidence. The dart, the chip, Ivy's testimony. If we can link it all to the new lab, we might force the authorities to act." That afternoon, Cam drove Maddie, Ivy, and Asher to a small veterinary clinic where his friend, Dr. Ramirez, agreed to scan Asher's microchip and review his injuries. The moment the scanner beeped, a string of numbers appeared, followed by a line of coded text, GE Empathy 07. Dr. Ramirez looked at them with wide eyes. "I've seen dogs from fighting rings, abandoned labs, but never one with this kind of code," she said softly, running her hand gently over Asher's scars. "He's strong, though. The surgery was meant to connect his nervous system to a human's. Maybe Ivy's special because she was the right match." Ivy, silent all morning, suddenly spoke up. "He remembers everything, the cages, the cold, the man with the scar. But he knows we love him. He says it doesn't hurt as much when we're together." Dr. Ramirez's eyes glistened. "He's lucky you found each other, sweetheart." After the appointment, they returned to Cam's house, where Maddie started to piece the story together for Ivy, carefully, gently, with none of the details glossed over. "You're brave, Ivy. You're not imagining things. Asher was made to understand you, and you to understand him. That's why your feelings are so strong. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault." Ivy looked down at Asher, who rested his head in her lap, then at Maddie, tears threatening but not falling. "Are they coming back for us?" Maddie held her close. "We're not alone anymore. Cam's here. We have evidence. We're going to make them stop." The next few days were a blur of activity. Cam shared his findings with a trusted federal contact, a woman named Agent Woods. She arrived in a nondescript sedan, wearing jeans and a windbreaker, and spent hours listening to Ivy, Maddie, and Cam recount the story. She took samples of the dart and the microchip info, promising to escalate the case. In the evenings, Ivy became Asher's shadow. Sometimes she'd sit in the yard, the shepherd's head in her lap, staring at the horizon. Maddie watched her, torn between awe and heartbreak. She saw the toll the bond took on both of them, how Ivy would shiver sometimes, lost in memories that weren't hers, how Asher would nuzzle her, anchoring her to the present. One night, after Ivy finally fell asleep, Maddie sat at the kitchen table with Cam and Agent Woods. "What happens if they come for us again?" Maddie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Agent Woods' eyes were hard. "This time, we'll be ready. The lab can't hide forever. But you need to be careful. The people funding this have resources. They're not above using force to protect their secrets." Maddie nodded, fighting back tears. "We just want to be left alone. For Ivy to be a kid again, for Asher to be safe." "You're doing everything right," Kim assured her. "And now, for the first time, they're scared. Not just of losing Asher, but of what Ivy knows." Later, as Maddie checked on Ivy one last time before bed, she found her niece awake, staring at the ceiling. "I'm not afraid anymore, Aunt Maddie," Ivy whispered. "Not with Asher, not with you." Maddie squeezed her hand. "Then we'll face whatever comes, together." In the darkness, Asher raised his head, his golden eyes full of trust. For the first time, Maddie truly believed they could win, that the bond between girl and dog, forged in fear and hope, was stronger than any secret lab or scarred enemy. And somewhere outside, beyond the reach of headlights and hidden threats, a new day was waiting. A day when the truth about Asher and Ivy could finally set them free. The day arrived gray and cold, the kind of morning where even the Idaho sun seemed reluctant to rise. Ivy stood in front of Cam's farmhouse window, watching frost feather the glass. Asher pressed against her hip, sensing her nerves, his breath puffing warm against her hand. Down the hallway, Maddie packed their things quietly. Emergency bags, copies of evidence, and a flashlight for every person. It felt like they were preparing for battle, and in a way, they were. By noon, Cam's contact, Agent Woods, had arranged the next move. The evidence, the dart, the microchip data, Ivy's testimony, was enough to justify a visit to the new pet therapy facility on the edge of Boise. It was registered as Harmony Health Center, its website filled with photos of smiling children and friendly dogs. But Maddie, Cam, and Agent Woods all knew what Ivy had seen in her dreams. Cages, labs, secrets hidden behind a polished facade. They loaded into Cam's battered SUV, Ivy and Asher in the back seat, Maddie up front, Agent Woods driving. As they wound through city streets and industrial parks, Ivy whispered to Asher, her hands trembling in his fur. "We're almost there," she breathed. "It's okay. I can feel you with me." Agent Woods parked down the block, handing Maddie a folder. "If something happens, run. We'll call backup, but this place has private security. You and Ivy are the priority. Don't try to be heroes." Maddie squeezed Ivy's hand. "We'll be safe. Stay close to me. Do what Agent Woods says." The building looked nothing like a lab. Modern glass, cheerful banners advertising therapy dog programs, a handful of cars in the lot. But Ivy's stomach twisted. As they approached, Asher's hackles rose, and he pressed against Ivy's legs, low and tense. Agent Woods strode through the automatic doors, flashing her badge to the receptionist. "FBI. We need to speak to your director." The woman blanched, stammering into a phone. Within seconds, 2 men in pressed suits arrived, one with cold, sharp eyes and a thin scar along his jaw. Ivy's hand clamped tight on Asher's fur. "It's him," she whispered. "The man from the cages." Cam tensed, hand hovering near his belt. "We're here about the dog," he said, voice steady. "And the girl. You know exactly who they are." The man with the scar smiled thinly. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. This project could save thousands of lives." Ivy felt a surge of something. fear, anger, a deep pulsing ache that wasn't her own, but Asher's. She locked eyes with the man, and for a moment the world spun. She saw cages, heard dogs barking in terror, smelled bleach and fear. The images battered her mind, growing stronger as the man reached for a button on the wall, his eyes flat and desperate. Suddenly, the room went cold. Ivy heard Asher's growl deep in her bones, a warning echoing through every nerve. She stepped forward, her voice clear and fierce. "Let us go. You can't keep doing this. You hurt them. You hurt Asher. You hurt me." The scarred man's lips curled. "You don't understand what's at stake." But Ivy did understand. She felt Asher's pain, his terror, and his hope. In that instant, their bond blazed into something bigger, stronger than anything the lab had ever engineered. As the man lunged toward her, everything seemed to slow. Ivy closed her eyes, reaching for Asher with her heart. And something impossible happened. Windows across the lobby shuddered, then shattered, a high whine filling the air. Security alarms blared, computers flickered and crashed. The two suited men staggered, clutching their heads, as if 1,000 screaming memories filled the room. Agent Woods shouted for backup, drawing her weapon. Cam pulled Ivy and Maddie behind the counter, shielding them with his body. But Ivy stood tall, Asher at her side, her eyes blazing with tears. The scarred man staggered forward, reaching for her, but Asher leapt between them, pinning him to the floor with a force that was all muscle and fury. The man struggled, gasping, but Asher's jaws held firm, not biting, only holding, making it clear that this was his choice now, not theirs. The chaos grew. More security stormed the lobby, but Cam and Agent Woods were ready, shouting orders, brandishing their badges, demanding everyone freeze. Sirens wailed outside as backup arrived, officers spilling through the doors. For one breathless moment, it seemed as if the world would break apart. But then Ivy spoke, her voice echoing above the noise. "Stop. No more hurting, no more cages." The effect was electric. Asher's grip loosened. The man with the scar slumped, defeated. The security guards hesitated, guns lowering, unsure who to trust. Agent Woods moved quickly, placing the evidence bag and Ivy's drawings on the reception desk. "You're all under federal investigation," she announced, voice hard as steel. "Any attempt to resist will be met with force. We have proof of animal cruelty, illegal experiments, child endangerment, and more." Police flooded the building, rounding up the staff, securing computers and files. The scarred man was handcuffed and led away, his eyes never leaving Ivy and Asher. He looked less like a villain now, more like a man who'd lost everything he'd built to his own cruelty. As the dust settled, Ivy slid to her knees, hugging Asher tightly. He nuzzled her face, whimpering softly, exhausted but alive. Maddie and Cam crouched beside them, holding each other, shaking with relief. Agent Woods knelt too, a rare smile breaking through her professional armor. "You did it, kid," she said quietly. "You saved him, and you saved yourself." Ivy looked up, tears shining in her eyes. "We did it together." It was over, at least for now. Outside, news vans gathered, reporters shouting questions, the world hungry for the story of the little girl and her dog who exposed a dark secret. Inside, Maddie wrapped her arms around Ivy and Asher, vowing never to let them go again. In that moment, Ivy realized something important. She wasn't just the girl who could feel a dog's pain. She was the one who had fought back, who had turned fear into hope, and who had proved that love, when fiercely held, could shatter even the darkest walls. The weeks that followed felt like waking from a long, cold winter. For the first time since Asher stumbled bleeding into Ivy's life, the world slowed down and sunlight poured through their windows without the threat of shadows lurking outside. Maddie, Ivy, and Asher returned to Bozeman with Cam's help, arriving at the little rental house that no longer felt like a hiding place, but a fresh beginning. For days, Maddie barely slept. There were police interviews, lawyers asking for statements, news vans parked up the street, and endless phone calls from reporters desperate for an angle. Maddie refused them all. She focused on Ivy and Asher, her world shrinking to the battered German shepherd sprawled on the living room rug, and the girl who, after so many months, had finally begun to sleep through the night without waking in terror. One afternoon, Ivy and Maddie sat in the sunlit kitchen, the scent of baking bread drifting through the air. Ivy's hands were steady as she braided dough, Asher lounging at her feet, tail thumping now and then as if keeping time. Maddie watched her niece with quiet awe, remembering the girl who once flinched from every loud sound, who clung to the edges of rooms. Now Ivy stood tall, her laughter bright, her words certain. News of the exposure at Harmony Health Center rippled through Montana and beyond. The FBI arrested everyone involved. The scarred man was charged with animal cruelty, kidnapping, and illegal experimentation. The government promised sweeping changes, and rescue organizations flooded the area to take in the animals left behind, many of whom, Ivy insisted, would recover if given patience and love. The townsfolk whispered about the little girl and her dog who had broken a criminal ring. Some were in awe, others wary of what they didn't understand, but most simply watched as Ivy and Maddie moved on with their lives. Maddie fielded offers from psychologists, animal therapists, and scientists who wanted to study the bond between Ivy and Asher. She declined every invitation, determined that Ivy would have a chance to be a kid again. But Ivy wasn't content to let their story end in silence. She saw something in the faces of the rescued children and animals, an echo of her own pain, a flicker of hope. One rainy morning, as she watched Asher nudge a trembling puppy into the safety of a blanket, Ivy turned to Maddie, her voice soft, but sure. What if we help other kids, ones who feel lost or scared like I did? And other dogs, too. Dogs like Asher who just need someone to listen? The idea grew quickly, taking root in the family's heart. Cam helped them purchase a plot of land on the edge of town, 10 acres of rolling hills and pine groves, once a rundown horse property. They spent long weekends clearing brush, repairing fences, and turning the old barn into a cozy center. Maddie and Cam built a series of small cabins for children to stay with their families. Ivy and her friends painted murals of dogs, stars, and wildflowers on every wall. They called it Whisper Paw Ranch, a place for healing where trauma wasn't a secret or a stain, but a bridge to understanding. Ivy worked side by side with Maddie, carefully selecting gentle rescue dogs from local shelters, helping each animal settle into their new lives. She taught the children who came, kids who had lost parents, who woke up with nightmares, who flinched at sudden sounds, how to approach the dogs, how to earn their trust. She shared her own story, not as a miracle, but as proof that broken hearts could be mended. Asher became the ranch's soul. He padded calmly through each cabin, checking on every child, his presence a silent reassurance. He seemed to know when a child needed comfort, or when another dog was struggling to adjust. Sometimes Ivy would find him sitting at the edge of the meadow, nose lifted to the wind, as if he was finally free to enjoy the peace he had fought so hard to find. The community began to change too. Volunteers arrived to help with chores and cook meals. Teachers brought their classes to learn about kindness and animal care. Veterinarians offered free clinics. One by one, families who once hid their pains stepped into the sunlight, drawn by the warmth of something real and welcoming. Maddie saw Ivy flourish. Her niece moved with quiet confidence, guiding children through their first introductions to the dogs, reminding them to listen with their hearts. Ivy laughed more. She danced barefoot through the grass, hair flying, cheeks flushed with health. She still dreamed of Asher's past sometimes, bad dreams that left her silent at breakfast, but now she had the words to talk about them, and people who would listen. One evening, as the sky blazed orange and gold over the ranch, Maddie found Ivy sitting on the porch, arms around Asher. The two watched as a group of children played fetch with a wobbly-legged pup, their shouts of joy drifting across the fields. Maddie sat beside her, pulling Ivy close. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You've given so many people hope." Ivy smiled, her eyes shining. "We did it together. And Asher. He always believed in me, even when I was scared." Maddie glanced down at the big shepherd, who lifted his head and nuzzled Ivy's hand. For the first time in what felt like forever, Maddie's heart was light. She understood now what Ivy had meant on that very first night. Some bonds weren't born of science or accident, but of love that refused to break, no matter the darkness. The ranch grew busier as word spread. Letters arrived from families Ivy and Asher had helped, each one a reminder of the difference they made. There were challenges, setbacks, even moments of fear, but the foundation was strong, built on everything they had endured and overcome. And every night, as Maddie locked the doors and turned out the lights, she paused for a moment to listen, to Ivy's soft laughter, to Asher's steady breathing, to the hum of hope that filled every corner of Whisper Paw Ranch. It was at last a home, a place to heal, a new beginning. The sun was beginning its slow descent over the hills, painting Whisper Paw Ranch in gold and honey. Ivy stood in the tall grass, her sneakers damp with dew, hair wild around her shoulders. Next to her bounded a plump, clumsy puppy, white with caramel patches and a tail that seemed to wag the rest of her body. Asher paced nearby, watchful but relaxed, his posture different now, proud, at ease, no longer haunted by every distant sound. Ivy laughed as the puppy tripped over her own feet and rolled, tongue lolling, before scrambling up to chase after a butterfly. "Come on, Luna," Ivy called. The puppy dashed back, leaping into Ivy's arms, licking her face with happy, reckless abandon. Ivy held her close, breathing in the warm puppy scent, feeling the thump of a tiny, fearless heart. From the porch, Maddie watched them, her niece and the two dogs, bathed in late afternoon light. Her heart felt full in a way she'd never imagined possible, the pain of the past replaced by something softer, more expansive. Cam sat beside her, boots propped on the railing, sipping a mug of coffee as he watched Ivy and Luna. "She's changed," Cam said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of everything they'd survived. Maddie nodded. "We all have. But Ivy, she's found her place. It's like she was always meant to be here." All around them, Whisper Paw Ranch hummed with life. Children painted bright murals on the barn walls. Volunteers repaired fencing, and dogs of every size and color romped through the pastures. What once had been just an idea, a wild hope for healing, was now a living, breathing community. The ranch welcomed new families every week, each one bringing their own scars and dreams. After dinner, Ivy and Maddie took Luna and Asher for a walk through the fields. The grass brushed Ivy's knees, and the air was sweet with the scent of wildflowers and earth. Ivy ran ahead with Luna, her laughter ringing out across the open space, while Asher ambled beside Maddie, occasionally glancing up at her as if checking in. They stopped by the small pond at the edge of the property. Ivy skipped stones across the glassy surface, Luna barking in encouragement. The puppy splashed after the stones, sending up little sprays of water that caught the sunlight. Maddie sat down on a fallen log, her arm around Asher, watching the simple joy of the moment. For a while, they said nothing, just listened to the birds. The distant sound of children playing, the peaceful silence of a place finally safe. Ivy turned, breathless, and flopped down in the grass beside Maddie. She rested her head on Asher's back. Luna curled up at her feet, already half asleep. "Aunt Maddie," Ivy said softly, eyes tracing the sky where a single hawk circled high overhead. "Do you think Luna can hear me like Asher does?" Maddie smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Ivy's forehead. "Maybe. You have a gift, Ivy. Some people spend their whole lives searching for a friend who truly understands them. You found two." Ivy grinned, pressing her face into Asher's fur. "She talks to me sometimes, not in words, more like feelings. She's happy here. She's not scared anymore." Asher's tail thumped in agreement. Maddie could almost believe she felt the same gentle wave of reassurance and contentment that washed over Ivy. The world felt both wide and close, stretched out before them, but anchored by the warmth of family, friendship, and a place to belong. As twilight settled, Ivy and Maddie walked slowly back to the house, Luna bounding ahead, Asher moving with a dignified calm that spoke of hard-earned peace. On the porch, children gathered around for story time, and Ivy joined them, Luna climbing into her lap. Ivy told the children about Asher, not the pain and fear, but the courage and love he'd shown. She spoke of how listening with your heart could heal even the deepest wounds. After the children drifted away, Ivy lingered, watching the stars appear one by one. Maddie sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her niece's shoulders. "You're happy?" Maddie asked quietly. Ivy nodded, a soft glow in her eyes. "I am. I think Asher is too. And Luna. We're all together." A breeze rustled the grass, Fireflies blinked in the darkness, their tiny lights dancing like hope made visible. Ivy turned, looking up at Maddie with a wisdom far beyond her years. She speaks too, you know. Luna, you just have to listen. Maddie smiled, tears stinging her eyes, not of sorrow, but of gratitude and awe. She leaned closer, whispering, I'm listening now. Inside the house, Cam strummed a gentle tune on his old guitar, the melody drifting out into the night. Ivy rested her head on Maddie's shoulder. Asher and Luna curled close, all four bathed in the soft, golden light spilling from the windows. There would still be challenges, hard days, old memories that crept in with the dark. But Maddie knew now they could weather them together. They had built something beautiful from the ruins of their pain. A home, a family, and a promise that nobody had to heal alone. And as the stars brightened over Whisper Paw Ranch, Ivy closed her eyes, hearing the quiet symphony of life all around her, the heartbeats of those she loved, the laughter of children, the hopeful song of a world that had given them a second chance. A new beginning, she thought. The rest of the story was theirs to write.